With a quick trip across the bridge to Charleston, our next stop along the Gullah-Geechee corridor takes us back in time to the old Slave Mart Museum in the heart of downtown Charleston, which is just off Queen Street. This very building was one of the most important locations for the domestic slave trade in America. And today's modern museum captures nearly every aspect of what was a sophisticated, tightly run, multi-million-dollar business. In the late 1850s, there were 40 locations in downtown Charleston where slaves were sold, but this was by far the most important and well-known. Back then, it was called Ryan's Mart, and sales of slaves that transpired here were advertised in newspapers as far away as Galveston, Texas.
So if you were a slave trader, interstate slave trader in the South, and someone said Ryan's Mart to you, they didn't have to mention Charleston or South Carolina. They would know exactly what you were talking about. So they would know Ryan's Mart.
Nicole Green is the museum's curator. And when she takes us to the rear of the building, she begins to paint a picture of what this parking lot might have looked like 160 years ago.
That wall probably a little bit higher.
Right, the wall would have been a little bit higher, and surrounding this entire lot, that four-story jail or barracoon where enslaved people were kept.
At the very end.
At the very end, where the people enter this parking lot right now. So that would have been blocking the building across the street, right, where the footlight players are now. The kitchen would have been over here on this side. And that small structure I described as a dead house or a morgue.
Literally right here.
Over here in this area. And this was the slave yard. This is where the enslaved people would have been exercised. This is where they would have been fed. And also this is where slave sales would happen before this sales room.
Our next destination would take us north to Georgetown County and a nondescript dirt road off Highway 521. It's Friendfield Plantation, once one of the most profitable rice plantations in the area. The land is now in private hands, but as we reunite with Michael Allen of the National Park Service, we see very real remnants of the life that was led here so many years ago. Small tenement cabins that once housed as many as 10 slaves in each dwelling. And it's here where he makes his case as to why highlighting and preserving the Gullah-Geechee heritage is so important and fundamental to understanding our state's history. On this plantation in 1850, Jim Robinson was born. He's the great-great-grandfather of First Lady Michelle Obama, a direct historical line from these plantation slave cabins to the White House in Washington, D.C.
When you put that in the whole context of, this is all one of the signatures of the Gullah-Geechee corridor and Gullah-Geechee culture, that you could have this structure here today. And I think our challenge in the 21st century is how do we connect, modern South Carolina with historic South Carolina to try to get a better understanding of life and how this place affects us even today in the 21st century.
I think when people have in their mind, if you've never been to the South, pictures of the quote-unquote Old South, this is sort of what it looks like in their head, right?
Well, that's true. That's true.
Gone with the Wind and Tara and all that.
Yeah.
One of the most popular, most visited stops along the Gullah-Geechee Heritage Corridor comes at Brookgreen Gardens, just north of Pawleys Island. The gardens are made up of what was once 4 different rice plantations, and it reminds us that in the Low Country, it wasn't cotton that was king, it was rice. In 1850, no matter where you were in America, if you were eating rice, chances are better than 50% that rice came from Georgetown County.
The fact that we're standing on what was formerly 4 rice plantations is so significant to the Low Country story and the Gullah-Geechee story, isn't it?
Absolutely right, because there were rice plantations. And because there were rice plantations, enslaved Africans from rice-producing countries were brought here, areas surrounding here, in the Gullah-Geechee community because of their knowledge and skills in rice production.
And their know-how and ingenuity. I mean, they brought that directly from Africa, didn't they?
Brought it directly from Africa, where the topography, the climate, was almost identical to their homeland here in South Carolina.
As we look out to what was once a huge working rice field, he tells me it's difficult to imagine today how labor-intensive it was 200 years ago to prepare this land for production. This parcel was once completely overrun with cypress trees. He takes me to the remnants of one cypress stump to give us an idea of what kind of labor went into these rice plantations.
This is a cypress tree log, the size that trees that had been in virgin swamplands.
In the field we were just looking at, basically, right?
Absolutely right. There were many. This is not an isolated tree trunk. And those are the axe marks.
These are the actual axe marks.
Axe marks to bring this tree down.
Boy, you know,
think
the
about
amount
how
of work
many
that it must have taken
Mhm.
to pull this out of that field. It must have been tremendous.
And being in that rice field at the time, there were also alligators. There were poisonous snakes.
Yeah, this wasn't exactly a real inviting, hospitable climate, was it?
No. There were mosquitoes carrying malaria.
When I drive today up Highway 17, and you may not have paid any attention to it, when we came across the Santee Delta, I always look to my left and to my right, and when I do that, I can imagine people of African descent out there. And when I look out there, as I drive up 17 today, coming across from Charleston to Georgetown County, then I see the signature. I see the imprint and the fingerprint of those Africans who transformed that landscape of the Santee Delta.
Because they were there.
Because they were there. And if we can find ways to convey to Carolinians as they are driving up Coastal Highway 17, whether it's the Santee, whether it's the Cooper, the Wando, the Ashtaboo, the Combahee, the Broad, as they drive through these various areas, estuaries, they're looking at the landscape that was transformed by Africans.